Hey everybody, welcome back to Divulgence. I hope everyone's having a very warm and joyous holiday. We're getting hit with some snow up here in Canada, and it's starting to get pretty cool. So I hope everyone is staying safe, enjoying themselves. Today, we have Dana, aka Rotting Jewels, joining us. She is a researcher, podcaster. She focuses on quite a few different topics, but because we have been talking about on and off a little bit about the process church that's come up in a few episodes, and we had a couple people recommend we talk about the process church, and one person even went so far as to say to bring Dana on. So here she is. Dana, thank you so much for being here. How are you today?
I'm good, Jordan. Thank you for having me. How are you?
Well, I'm doing well, thank you. I'm doing really well. I'm. It's a pleasure to finally meet you. Can you just give us a little bit of background on yourself and some of the stuff that you like researching and working on?
Sure. So I'm still pretty new to all of this stuff. I see people that say that they've been in like conspiracy or parapolitical research since the 80s. I've only been doing this since mid 2023. Started out on Instagram with Dave McGowan's program To Kill, just reading chapter by chapter on there. And then I moved over to YouTube. The things that I primarily focus on or that I'm mostly known for, if someone knows my research, is the Process Church of the Final Judgment, aka Best Friends Animal Society. And because I cut my teeth with that topic in regards to genealogy, some people now know me for my Candace Owens, Charlie Kirk work, doing her family tree as well.
Awesome. We'll get into that near the end for a few minutes. But like I said, I would love to focus on the process church for a little bit. Can you do just like a bit of a general background in, like I said, it's very new to me. So can you give us a background on what it is, maybe who started it, when, and kind of what gave it its prominence and why it's so significant today, some of that stuff.
Sure. So what I'll do is I'm going to go with like what I call the public consumption narrative first because I think that that's helpful and then kind of work backwards. So
I love it.
public consumption narrative is there's two Scientologists, Robert and Marianne de Grimston. They're in Scientology, they decide that they can do it better and they're going to take Hubbard's e-meter and they're going to start their own group and they call it compulsions analysis. They leave, they do their thing, and then they go to Mexico, Stuhl, the Yucatan Peninsula. They go out there and they allegedly are beating themselves in huts and finding Satan or Satanists finding them. Then they go back to London and start looking very spooky, what people would know when you look up old images like the one you used in the thumbnail. They've got capes, things of that sort. Um, which is obviously very controversial in, the flower child, hippie child era, right? It was kind of antithetical to that whole thing. And then they come over to the United States. They get incorporated in New Orleans and they go to California. And if you ask them, they definitely did not recruit Charles Manson. They had nothing to do with the Manson murders, nor did they have anything to do with the Son of Sam crimes, because according to them, to this very day, they officially disbanded in 1974. That's where they would like to leave it at.
That's so that's essentially their line, right?
Yep.
Gotcha. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Yep.
So that's the public narrative. The truth is a lot more complicated, a lot more complex. So the reality is, yes, Robert and Marianne de Grimston were Scientologists. There are rumors. There was a investigation involving INS, the FBI, and the Church of England that Robert de Grimston was L. Ron Hubbard's right-hand man. I cannot confirm or deny this. There's been no documentation of it. I think part of that is that he's still alive. But they were Scientologists. They did leave. They did defect. Now, the story is that the group that they put together was called Compulsions Analysis. There's no proof of that, and I I don't endorse that part of what people say just because I have all of the business filings from when I went to Ed Sanders' archive. I think, in my opinion, that at that time, that was some sort of Scientology course that they were taking. And so they're just like, we're going to focus on this with our little outside group. But they call it compulsions analysis. Now, as far as them leaving and going to Stuhl and the Yucatan and all that stuff, that is true. However, the reason why they don't like people to know this, is because the British Medical Association was threatening to investigate them and shut them down because they were making people sign waivers that if your mental health was affected, you could not come after them. You could not come after the process for any liability, which is odd. So they paint it as we're going on this magical mission, to go find ourselves or do whatever. So they do leave, they go, and they're allegedly beating themselves in huts and finding Satan, and I do think that Satan found them. But the Church of Scientology, according to their internal records, they were doing paramilitary training there. And so I think that it was a little bit of both. I think that two things can be true at the same time. Then they come back to the UK, and this is where we see this sort of scene with the Beatles, these sort of counterculture folks in the UK. I'm totally spacing on some of the names, but this is where we see that sort of crossover. They're hanging out with Mick Jagger, Marianne Faithfull, and then they do go to New Orleans. Now, the reason why they go to New Orleans, there's a couple of reasons here, but this is just my opinion, is that the state of Louisiana operates under Napoleonic law. A lot of people don't know that. So it's basically kind of an island unto itself, so to speak. It is different than the rest of the 49 states. But when they go to New Orleans, they are incorporated by by a man by the name of Thomas Jude Baumler Jr., who was involved in the JFK assassination, according to the late Jim Garrison. This is the man that incorporates them, and then they leave from there and they go to California. They do spend time with Charles Manson. Charles Manson, whether they're going to admit it or not, I really don't care. Because, I've read police reports from the LAPD, the LASO, and INS and the FBI. Those logos that the girls were sewing on their jail outfits, their prison outfits during the trial that looked like sort of like swastikas, but they had weird curves. According to the cops, what the girls told them was that that was a process logo, not a swastika. So that makes sense to me. Now, the interesting thing in regards to the Tate LaBianca killings, not so much LaBianca, but in regards to the Tate killings themselves, according to the FBI and INS, because Ed Sanders spent most of his, I wouldn't say adult life, but a lot of his adult life investigating these crimes. And he's the reason why we know so much about the process today, because he laid a lot of that groundwork. Is that there was a hit that was placed. The process paid the family to commission this hit, and the hit was for Sharon Tate. And this came out during one of, I think it was Linda Kasabian's parole hearings, where she said, yeah, we were there to murder two women. It was only supposed to be two women that were there. But according to FBI and the INS, the purpose of the hit was in regards to something that Sharon Tate had overheard about Sirhan Sirhan, or in relation to Sirhan Sirhan. Obviously, that's kind of a fucking
Really?
weird thing for a government official to say, right? Like, what does that have to, what do these things
Absolutely.
have to do with each other? Well, when the private investigator and Ed Sanders asked, their response was, that's a matter of national security. So we'll never know. They still won't say anything. There is a secret process file that is in the RFK archives in the JFK library that the FBI told Ed Sanders you basically can't get access to.
Yeah.
I don't really know what that means either. Now, the reason why I say that we know what we know because of Ed Sanders is because Ed Sanders wrote the book called The Family. There are multiple updated versions since his original publication, but in his original book, He's the first person who puts out the timeline, any history about the process, anything of that nature. The process attempts to sue Ed Sanders, and they do this stateside initially. So they settle outside of court. The publisher, in my opinion, kind of screws him over here in the States. He served in Illinois and Chicago, and the chapter is removed. Now, in these updated versions later on, they're referenced as a British satanic cult. So for anybody who has read an updated version, the process is the group that he is referring to. What's very interesting though, and this is very telling in my opinion, is that when this went to court in the UK, which is their home turf, Ed Sanders won and he made case law. It came out during that trial that all the things that were alleged and more, that's what they were doing. And they could not prove that Ed Sanders had libeled them or slandered them, and that they had lost any income because of this. This is something that it's a hill that I'm going to die on because, again, I've been to Ed's archives twice. We would not have pretty much any of the information about the process without Ed and without that lawsuit. And a lot of people like to go out here and say that Ed lost them. No, he didn't. The publisher settled outside of court in the States, but he won on their turf. And again, I think that speaks to something. Now, in regards to the Son of Sam, that is its own sort of universe within itself. But yes, there is connections. I would encourage people to go read the late Maury Terry's The Ultimate Evil. From there, when they leave New York, they go to Atlanta. There is an argument that could be made that there possibly is some involvement in the Atlanta child murders. Being conveniently 3 months, I think, after Wayne Williams was sentenced, that is when they pack up and they head over to the West Coast, where you will find them now in Kanab, Utah, as Best Friends Animal Society. Why would
Wow.
a cult turn into an animal rescue group? Well, it's because these people have always deified animals. This makes sense to me. This is the natural conclusion or the natural progression of their sort of theology because they have four deities. At the root is Scientology. This is the point I try to drive home with people who want to understand or try to grasp what the process is because Scientology says, no, no, they're not ours. And they said the same thing about Charles Manson, which is interesting because
Right.
it's like,
Oh,
why are you
absolutely. Yeah. Very interesting.
why, why are you guys like pushing back on this so many decades later? It shouldn't matter. He's dead, right? But there's still that core root of Scientology within the process. And I've shown this persists throughout their belief system despite their denials in their internal writings, because in Scientology, they have, I think they call it like body thetans. So it's like spoopy little stuff on your soul, little ghosts, whatever. And that's why
Okay.
you like hold the cans. I don't know, man. I don't do Scientologies. I don't, it's not my thing. However,
Cool.
the process has their own similar thing, and it's called Freddy bodies. So these are these little things that are attached to you. Obviously, I think Freddy bodies is a really weird name. Don't know why they chose
Yeah.
that. However, that is the root of it. But what the process did is make it so that they could infiltrate any group when they came over to the United States. And when you consider the timing of the counterculture movement, it's honestly quite brilliant. And I think that it is most likely the talented PR work, I would say, or the long game of L. Ron Hubbard. Don't get me wrong. The guy was a scumbag. He was also a con man. But, you know, in order to be a con man, you have to be talented to an extent to be able to lure people, right? And I mean, look at Scientology today. It's people say it's dying. I don't believe that. I think it's gone underground like every single other cult since the beginning of humanity. However, they have four deities. They have Lucifer, Jehovah, Christ, and Satan. That allows them to go with the motorcycle gangs, which they do, the Jesus freaks, the tent revival circuit, which they do. You know, they do a lot of ministry work, as they say, where they're ministering in prisons. I believe that they're recruiting in prisons, much like Scientology does through their Narcanon and Crimenon programs. They had drug rehabs, and even though they were not licensed for any of this, so a lot of this stuff they actually weren't supposed to be doing, visiting homes for mentally handicapped children, elderly, things of that sort. So and with all of that, in the beginning, Marianne de Grimston, the lady of the cult, that people like to paint her as this very wicked woman who was kind of the hand that controlled everything. And I think that that only goes so far. But she was very anti-vivisectionist, and that was, you cannot harm animals, you cannot harm dogs. That is a worse sin than hurting a human being. People know the process, a lot of their iconography, because of the German Shepherd. Do I think that part of it is a Nazi angle? Yeah, absolutely. I do, because, Hitler with his Alsatians. I think that there is that Nazi element to it. Um, but that's always been there, sort of looming in the background. They've always deified these animals. And so when you whittle away all of the religious elements, so to speak, publicly, it's natural that they end up as the biggest animal nonprofit lobbying, I would say lobbying firm in the country as of today.
Jeez, wow, the reach just keeps growing. Um, can you just quickly before you go any further? Can you just recap on a couple things? So, who was the individual that you mentioned that was involved in the JFK plot? I think you were saying that he was connected with the church, or he was in passing with Charles Manson, or both, maybe.
So that is Tommy Jude Baumler Jr. So he was a wandering bishop. I have not read Peter Levenda's work. I know that Peter Levenda talks about Tommy Baumler, though. But Tommy Jude Baumler Jr., he was a wandering bishop. He was also a lawyer. He was also a hypnotist who was friends with one of the most famous hypnotists of that era, William Bryan. And he is, again, the one who incorporated them. And according to Timothy Wiley, one of the founders of the process, who has wrote a number of books, probably about 10 of them, that are written in the third person from the perspective of his watcher. I've read all of them because you get little chestnuts about the process here and there. According to Timothy Wiley, Marianne de Grimston and Tommy Jude Baumler got on pretty well because they were both really into hypnotism. Well, Scientology and auditing is a form of hypnotism, so that makes sense to me.
Okay. And another thing that was quite interesting, going back to the Manson murder. So it was put forth that it was a hit. Only 2 women were supposed to be there, but was the hit only supposed to be on Sharon Tate, or were both women targets? Or was that just or is that
don't know.
Sure
that we don't know. This is something that came up in one of the girls. I believe it was Linda Kasabian. I could be wrong. I'd have to go back and look in my files. But I know it was when one of the girls was up for parole, and her attorney cut her off when she started saying that. He was like, no, don't go there. But as far as the FBI and INS go, because I have the report, it was a hit that, according to them, was specifically about Sharon Tate. And to me, this could be for a number of reasons. I don't think that the FBI and INS was pulling Ed's leg, per se. We know that there were I wouldn't even say that they're rumors anymore, just because there's so many corroborating stories of it in regards to the pornography that was being filmed at the Polanski house, but not just at the Polanski house. Mamas and the Papas, Dennis Hopper, all of Jane Fonda, all of these people within this Laurel Canyon scene, so to speak. So we have all of that going on, and we know that Jay Sebring was a Satanist. He had a dungeon in his house. They were doing these big orgies. So to me, was it something about Sirhan? Because we don't know a lot about Sirhan's social and religious life. Not really. We know that he was involved in Rosicrucianism, I'm sorry. But we don't really know a lot about what he was doing in that area leading up to the time of the crimes. And I think that that is a piece of the puzzle that we are missing, because if Sirhan, let's say, was at a party, one of these parties where everybody's hanging out and they're probably devolving into some type of orgy, and if that
Yeah.
gets filmed, that's going to be a problem, right? And that makes sense to me. And the process loves to say that either they had no contact with Charlie, or that Charlie maybe went into one of their bookstores. They kind of have a hard time keeping their story straight, but according to Charlie, Charlie met the de Grimstons at Roman Polanski's house. He
Okay.
has that letter in writing. So I'm not going to throw out the baby with the bathwater, because was Charles Manson kind of batshit crazy? It's like, yeah, the guy had a rough life, like whatever. And I'm not sympathizing for him at all. I'm just saying, like, a
Yep.
broken clock is right twice a day. And he was pretty clear on the conversation that he had with Marianne de Grimston about Robert specifically, that Robert had screwed things up for everybody in their circles because of a movie that Robert did with Audrey Hepburn. Well, what kind of movie would that be? Probably porn. Probably porn. So I think it would be problematic for individuals like the de Grimstons to be caught on camera doing this distasteful behavior. And depending on where or what's going on, was Sirhan in the background in one of these movies? I don't know.
Wild. That's crazy. That's crazy. We in the audience here, we got a comment. I heard the main targets were Tate, Bruce Lee, and that cool cat Steve McQueen. I mean, that's a lot of big name targets, but it's interesting that they all did end up dead. So I wonder, yeah, do you know anything going on there? Have you heard anything like that before, or is that just
Well, Steve McQueen and Bruce Lee weren't they weren't murdered in relation to any of this. I mean,
yeah,
the thing with Steve McQueen, Steve McQueen was very in love with Sharon Tate. I think
yeah,
that a lot of men were. She was obviously a very, very beautiful woman, kind of a timeless beauty. Um, but there's also the fact that they were all just, I mean, Roman was, to an extent, some could argue, kind of pimping her out, I
oh,
mean,
just imagine. I could totally see that. Look at
the
like,
cops talk about the films that were stolen where it's like they insinuate that a movie that Sharon was in with a couple of guys, that it looked like she was not a willing participant in that film. And so I think that there's an argument to be made for that as well. I know that Polanski was very paranoid about Bruce Lee. Polanski was kind
right.
of looking at everybody, but I also don't think that Roman's hands are clean in any of this. I also don't think that he was the architect behind the madness necessarily. Do I think that he had foreknowledge? Yeah, I do. I mean, it's my opinion. I've looked at this stuff long enough. I've read every single different person's account of their perspective, and it's, people got to ask themselves. And, a lot of folks know chaos. I think that that's one of the biggest limited hangouts on the topic. Unfortunately, I have multiple
Yeah.
reasons for feeling that way. But, why was Jack Nicholson in attendance every single day at the Manson trial? Why does nobody talk about that? Jack Nicholson was one of Roman's best friends. Roman would be arrested later for raping an underage girl at Jack Nicholson's house.
Jack's house.
Why did Dennis Hopper have a private meeting with Charles Manson in the courthouse off record? Why did Vincent
Really?
Bugliosi allow that? Yes.
Dennis Hopper and Manson had a side meeting at the trial. Wow.
No, it wasn't a side meeting at the trial. They had a private meeting.
Sorry. Yeah, a
Yeah,
private
like a
meeting.
private. Yeah, but it's why was Dennis Hopper allowed to do that? It's because all these people were hanging out. This is a very tight knit group. I think that Dennis Hopper had to sit down with Charlie. I don't think that maybe it went the way that he wanted it to. I think that the process got Charlie to shut up more than anybody else, because once they came to visit him, he shut the fuck up about it.
Right.
Um, but it's, Jack Nicholson paints it as, I was just curious about, the machinations of, this sequestered jury, whatever. And it's like, no, I actually think that you were there making sure that people weren't telling on your friends, because your friends were involved in a lot of nasty stuff.
Interesting. And I mean, like, I could totally see that, because I mean, look at how some of these people stick together in Hollywood, right? Like, you got someone like Meryl Streep, who you think would, she talks down about Weinstein, and you'd think she would stick up for any kind of victim or any kind of bad deed or anything like that. But I mean, she gives Polanski a fucking standing ovation, and she still loves the guy. Um, the guy's not even allowed in the country, back in the country. Um, and everybody knows, like, the disgusting stuff he did. And I'm sure the things that some people in Hollywood know, they would know even more. They would be privy to even more. So, yeah, it's so hypocritical. But
It is.
yeah, point being that, yeah, I could totally see someone like, a big movie star, Jack Nicholson, just checking to see, who's telling on who, and who's not barking, so to speak. Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, Polanski's I just recently, it was probably about 6 months ago, was the first time that I watched a Roman Polanski film, and I watched Rosemary's Baby, which, watching it after all of my research, it was a very unique viewing experience for me. I watched it with my patrons, and I will say this, the man is incredibly talented. He
Yeah,
truly does have a gift. He makes a great fucking movie,
yeah,
okay? Like, I think we can all agree to that, objectively speaking. He is a great artist, and there is a part where I see people struggling to separate the art from the artist, because I was a huge fan of Jack Nicholson before doing this research. But,
yeah,
you get to a point where it's how how much of a pass do you give? That's a personal choice that everybody has to make on their own. But, I can say that he is a talented artist in regards to his filmmaking, but I can also say that he's a scumbag. I think that he's a
yeah,
fucking pedophile, and
yeah,
I think that he knew what was going to happen to his wife. And there are a lot of other people that think that as well. Like, certainly can't necessarily prove it. The guy's getting up there in age. He's not going to live forever, but it seemed that a lot of people had foreknowledge, if I'm being honest. You find too many accounts, especially of people that come from what I like to call like the Polish crew of Romans, because all of these people that, they just happen to be close friends with him, and you
mhm,
don't really find out some of these things until later. So a good example of this is a man by the name of Jerzy Kosinski. Uh, he is one of the biggest supervillains in modern history, in my opinion. The guy's a complete fucking scumbag. And he's known for, oh my gosh, I can't think of the book. Hold on, let me look it up. He's known for a book. It's a Holocaust book. And in this book,
of course.
it's apparently very graphic, and he won many awards for it. Let me feed The Painted Bird. Okay, so the book is called The Painted Bird, and it's him growing up in this era and the things that, he had to go through. Well, come to find out that all of that stuff was a lie, but, this is where he gained his notoriety from or his popularity from. Now, he knows Roman Polanski. He is the person that actually introduced Wojciech and Abigail Folger, which is interesting because we have Jerzy Kaczynski over here in New York, and he's introducing Abigail and Wojciech Frykowski because Wojciech comes over with Roman. Wojciech's father was funding Roman's first movie in Wojciech's family. That's a whole separate discussion. But you have Jerzy Kaczynski introducing Abigail and Wojciech. And then on the night of the murders, according to Jerzy, he was supposed to be there, but there was a complication with his luggage at the airport, and so he was not able to make it. Then we have another Polish person within this circle by the name, she's now Ava Roosevelt. And Ava Roosevelt, she turned onto Cielo Drive, and her gas tank light came on, and she put the car in reverse and backed away roughly at 11:50 p.m. that night. A little too close to the murders because the timeline that is out there, there's a lot of contradictions. And so I do not endorse the official narrative. And so Ava's cutting it pretty damn close. Now with Jerzy Kaczynski, there's also a connection to the process. So we have the guy who introduced Abigail and Wojciech, who doesn't show up, and he's not there that night because of this luggage mishap. Well, it was roughly, I think, 2 years after the murders, maybe 3. He was a professor at Yale, very prominent professor, and he brought the process to give a class on death. And he talks about the process coming in and bragging about how they were involved in the Manson murders. So this is what I'm talking about with their whole thing of trying to distance themselves and say, no, we had nothing to do with Charlie. He was a dirty hippie. It's what you have to look at so many different perspectives, though, to pull all of this together. You're not going to find this in one place. This has taken, 2 years of work, and I'm still not done. But this is just a prime example of the process mocking people, thinking that people are stupid. Every Manson documentary that has come out doesn't touch the process. And the only documentary that did come out that did go into the process, but then turned around and did the ultimate shitcoat in the last episode to besmirch the late Maury Terry was the Sons of Sam on Netflix.
Yeah, that that documentary is great until the point where it, like you said, it just kind of turns around and just shits all over Maury. Wow, jeez, man, you're blowing my mind. A lot of interesting facts coming out here, and a lot of interesting notions. So I mean, what was the purpose of the Process Church, and what were their goals? Are their goals
to bring about the end of the world? Their core belief is that humanity is the devil.
So they want to bring about the end of the world?
Yeah. I would say a lot of people, it's I see Nemesis in Hades. That's a very dear friend of mine in your chat. Hello, I just wanted to say hi and I love you. So that is people like to throw around the word accelerationist in regards to groups like O9A or 764, and well, there's connections to the process there. There's a lot of connections to the Satanic Temple as well, but the ground or root theology of these groups, besides the veneration, sacrifice, and abuse of animals, is, bringing about the end of humanity. A lot of this stuff has to do with transhumanism, with this AI technology type of stuff. They think that they're going to live forever. And, in regards to the animals, because whether it's Timothy Wiley in one of his books or in the process, their very favorable documentary, Sympathy for the Devil, it's in the Wayback Machine up there in a full copy.
Yeah.
they say like, "Oh, you know, it's completely preposterous. We would never harm animals. You know, we just like these dogs and we were just trying to be goth and edgy, you know, and we have, you know, the white German shepherd named Lucifer and the black German shepherd named Satan." And it's like, well, it came out in court that, you know, you guys were having sex with these dogs on top of the animal, you know, the animal sacrifice. And there were people that were members that, you know, had left pretty early, I would say, shortly after their time in Mexico and Stuhl, that all of the Processians were basically emaciated, but the dogs were very, very well fed. And this speaks to what they think about people because their children, the survivors that have come out and have documented their time growing up in this cult, they were treated very poorly. There are some horror stories that have come out about processed children. One that was, you know, I say murdered. They say, you know, it was an accident.
Right.
Um, they don't value human life. They value animals over humans.
Hmm. And that's kind of odd. They want to bring about the end of. Okay, so they don't want to bring up. Do they want to bring about the end of the world or the end of humanity? And they want to like leave the animals. Is that kind of what they want? Or
It's kind of a good question, isn't it? Because it's humanity is the devil, right? Yeah.
right? Yeah,
You're picking up on it. Yeah,
okay.
it makes you wonder because there's so many contradictions with not only their theology, you know, their whole thing is like, "Oh, we were just being edgy and saying, what if Jesus and Satan were friends?" And everybody freaked out. And it's like, no, no, no. I've I've read all of you guys' teachings. I mean, they literally had something called the rape game. Charlie
Oh
talked
yeah.
about this game. And it's, you know, what do they want to bring about at the end? I don't know. Do I think that they think that they're smarter than everybody and that they're going to bring themselves back in some sort of AI or transhumanist form? Well, yes, I do because they've written about it. There's a whole fan fiction book, well not fan fiction, I would say it's just a novel that somebody wrote about Marianne de Grimston where she's already reincarnated in a digital Camelot. So we have that element going on. We have William Sims Bainbridge, who is, you know, a leading processian today, even though he will deny this, that he writes from this perspective where you can't tell if it's fiction or if it's historically accurate because he mixed truths and untruths in it. But in this book, it's talking about he receives a package from one of the founders and it has this container with these cylinders in it and the cylinder is supposed to contain samples of this founder's DNA and it's all these instructions on how to bring this person back to life, how to reincarnate them, and that William Sims Bainbridge is tasked with doing this. Now, William Sims Bainbridge, he was involved in like the development of World of Warcraft and some other very popular online games, and he has written books about how he has built in dead family members of his and some processians into these games, basically doing what he describes as necromancy, like digital necromancy. This makes sense to me because in the mid to late 70s, when the process is in their tent revival circuit sort of phase,
Yeah.
they are out there bragging about that they are working on necromancy and trying to perfect it.
Oh man, that's crazy. I mean, whenever necromancy is involved, it's just like something's going down. That someone's not telling the truth, and something shady's going on. So where I mean, so in modern day now, where does the Process Church stand? Are they still around? I mean, um, I know there's been new publishings on them. I don't know. I think there were old publishings though. but are they still a thing? Are they
Oh, yeah.
still kicking? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. They're very popular. Absolutely. So, um, again, keeping because people separate the process and Scientology, and I try to tell people don't do that. It's you're giving Scientology a pass because
Yeah.
no
Okay.
matter where you're going with the process, whatever faction it is, the Scientology part is still there. So we have best friends. This is what I say is sort of the corporate process, right? Because, hey, they're trying to save animals. That's good, right? There's nothing wrong with that. I would highly disagree.
Right.
Best Friends does not have a good track record. Um, but they have a lot of money, they have a lot of wealth, and that is where excuse me, that is where a lot of the original founders, went to, was in Kanab. Then we have what is known as, and this has been confirmed via a gang stalking campaign that was against me from these people, that there is the Neo process. This is just something that was a term that people gave to the sort of new era of processians. This is going to be groups like the Temple of Psychic Youth, Psychic TV, Genesis Peorage, Skinny Puppy, Nine Inch Nails, Rick Rubin, Marilyn Manson, that whole scene. So that's what we would almost kind of term the Neo process. That's one part of it. I would say that's like 80s, 90s era Neo process. Then we have another faction of Neo processians, and this faction is, well, it was out of New York. I'm not quite sure where it is now, with an individual by the name of J.J. Brine. He had something called the Vector Gallery in New York. And this gallery is blatantly processing. They have altars to Charles Manson. He died a very suspicious death about 4 years ago when he was really young. Still don't know what happened to him. It's very shady. But he, just like the original process, he had his female counterpart, his co-founder, and so she is carrying the torch for him. And just like the original process, they are very litigious. And then we have, again, another corporate faction, I would say, but I would not call this the Neo process because I just think that this is the Satan part of Christ, Lucifer, Jehovah, and Satan. And that is the Satanic Temple of today that many people know that has religious exemption status in the United States. There are interviews with Lucy Greaves, aka Doug Messner, Dougie, One Eye Doug, where he is sitting there talking about that the Baphomet statue that many people know, that is actually based off of process theology, the reconciliation of opposites, the coming together of Christ and Satan. That's the whole reconciliation of opposites. So not only is it based off of process theology, but at their headquarters in Salem, they have an e-meter or P-scope, as the process calls it. And Doug has said himself in interviews not that long ago that he believes that he can improve the use of the e-meter or P-scope to make it more effective.
What are your thoughts on these e-meters and ohm meters and P scopes and Dick scopes and yeah, what are your thoughts on all those things?
Um, I think that first, it's I like to remind people that when the Barker Ranch raid, I think it was Barker Ranch, not Spawn, when that raid Manson during the Manson case, they found an e-meter or a P-scope there. There were multiple separate
Right.
accounts of people saying there were Scientology games going on down at the ranch, right? Um, a lot of people don't know, and I think that it's odd, especially considering how long Scientology's been outed, even though I say it's a very limited hangout sort of outed with Leah Remini's show, Scientology, The Aftermath, where it's painted as the sort of kooky cult that takes all your money and it might separate you from your family, right? But they don't really talk about the e-meter itself. I've only seen two individuals talk about it, one of them being Timothy Wiley, that the e-meter, when you're doing this auditing session, that there are very, very, very small voltages of electricity that are going through it. So it's very light ECT therapy. No
Oh,
one talks about this though. Everybody tries to
yeah.
paint it as a placebo effect. All defect I've never heard a defector except for one that they don't show their face or anything. Nobody knows who they are. Nobody talks about this, but they did a video because some people will like hawk these things on eBay, right? Like some of these
Oh,
e-meters. And
okay.
so they took a stake and they just took the ends where the cans were and held it on, and it cooks the steak. It turned it black. So over time, and they changed the settings on it for what the auditing session might be, depending on whatever they're doing. Because with these auditing sessions, when you're reading through this stuff or you hear from these former members, you're sitting there basically being interrogated about your thoughts and thoughts of your past life and like your dirty dreams and stuff like that. And so you could be sitting there holding on to these things, getting interrogated for, 16, 20 hours. There are Scientologists who use this e-meter and they're pregnant. They're auditing their baby while they're pregnant. The idea that that's not causing some
Wow.
sort of irreparable harm to that child is completely insane to me, and the fact that people don't talk about it is very disturbing to me, especially these faces that have come out and spoken out against the church. So I have pretty strong feelings about the e-meter. I don't think that it's helpful to look at it as this sort of, because I think a lot of people do. They're just like, "Oh, it's soup cans hooked up to a thing," and, like, people just get this placebo
Yeah.
effect. No, it's very, very slight. It's but it is, I would imagine, just like anything else in life, if there's something that you're not told is going on physiologically, because even very, very small amounts of electroconvulsive therapy can kill you, if we're being honest. If you have an electrolyte imbalance, it can kill you. It can screw up your skeletal muscle, can screw up your cardiac muscle. So I could see how that could become addictive. If you feel like you're getting something good and you're not being told that you're getting these little voltages of electricity. I think the Scientology is really dangerous. And I think that it is just painted as this sort of goofy cult because all of these ex members that are out here are just like, oh, Scientology's numbers are dwindling. And, oh, David Miscavige and Shelley Miscavige. And it's like, why should anybody believe any of you guys? There's no evidence that the numbers are dwindling because I don't separate Scientology from the process, first of all. Secondly, what would Scientology do if it wasn't maintaining what it was back in 70s, the 80s, the 90s? Because people need to remember, being a Scientologist used to be a sign of wealth and a celebrity status. It used to be very very
Right.
cool. It's not anymore. And a lot
Yes.
of that has to do with Tom Cruise, right? And so it's not anymore. And so what are they going to do? They're going to go underground like every other cult has done, again, since the beginning of time. They're not going to sit here and publish their rosters with all of their numbers. People don't necessarily want to be associated with that publicly because it's bad PR for them.
True. True. And yeah, I mean, on another note, like if you can see videos online of people trying to like film in their buildings and stuff, and they're so secretive, right? So, um, I mean, if it's something that's supposed to be like something good and above level that's supposed to bring happiness to people or whatever the hell they claim, why is it so sketchy and secretive and locked down and forceful and cult like? And yeah, it's really fucky. It really is. Um, yeah. Um, I don't know. What is there any other before we move on to Candace Owens? Is there any other aspects of the process church that you feel like you want to share, or any other points that maybe I didn't specifically ask about? I mean, I know it's a pretty, it can be a pretty complex subject with which you've greatly demonstrated, but maybe there's just something that you wanted to talk about and we just didn't get to it.
Well, hopefully, I don't want to repeat myself. I feel like I ramble and I kind of like go down all these different things because I just have like so much in my brain about the process. So I apologize if any of that was disjointed. I'm working
No.
on the podcast trying to lay out like a better timeline of things where I try to debunk things in a semi chronological order. But I would say there are bands, groups, because Doug, the temple, like me and Doug have had very public fights on Twitter or X where, he's not good at debating when somebody actually challenges him with information where it's clear that the person has done their research versus like when he went on Tucker Carlson and he just acts like this sort of edgelord, right? And like he's so smart and tough. Like it's you have that whole thing, and then you also have, like, there's bands like Integrity of today, okay? So, like, Integrity, their whole thing, all of their music, they say it themselves, is based off of process theology. There's a lot of different artists out here who do preach this, and I would say that when you're looking up the process, if you see something and it's the people are being interviewed and they're like, "Oh, well, like we just said that." Add them to your suspect list. If you get interested in looking into the process, add them to your suspect list because this has been a habit of theirs since they were birthed, so to speak. Because I am of the opinion that when Robert and Marianne defected, because Hubbard did declare them suppressive people in December of 1965, I am of the opinion that they were given orders by Hubbard to create the process because Scientology's internal records from their old CIA, the Guardian's office, it stated that you could be declared a suppressive person, a defector, publicly so that it would protect your cover. I think that this is why the de Grimstons never got in trouble with Scientology per se. They were never really punished for taking the e-meter or the p-scope and Hubbard's his technology. They never really got in trouble. Obviously, shit kind of hit the fan with the Manson crimes. And after the Manson crimes, it's fascinating. Scientology releases a list of defector groups or squirrel groups, and we have the process is named in that. Interestingly enough, that also makes sense. However, what doesn't make sense is that they also added the Church of Satan. Well, why would they add the Church of Satan to their defector list or their squirrel groups? Probably because of Susan Atkins, Sexy Sadie, because Sexy Sadie was working for uh, the Church of Satan. She was a dancer there, right? So that makes sense. They also have internal documents. We know Bruce Davis was a Scientologist. They say that Squeaky Fromme was a Scientologist as well. This is according to the church. There are a lot of what I call secret Scientologists, but again, we see this cross pollination with the process. So if you see someone trying to poo poo the process angle, especially someone that's in the industry, so to speak, whether it be movies or music or art, I would say go ahead and just add them to your suspect list because there's a very good likelihood if they're trying to distance themselves, it's because they don't want people to know that they're associated because that is a consistent theme.
Gotcha. Yeah, it makes sense too. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that introduction, kind of a little bit of a crash course on the Process Church. We have a little bit of time left before we start wrapping up. Let's talk about Candace Owens a little bit. She's, I mean, obviously everyone pretty much knows who she is. She's another case of these people who have kind of strayed from the pack. She used to be with the Daily Wire, and now she's really blowing up on her own. And she's kind of taking this, small time podcast platform, but with $100,000 budgets or more, and studios, and how much fucking money she makes every episode. But anyways, she's blowing up quite a bit, obviously. But she's also pretty controversial for different reasons. Yeah, you've been focusing on the Charlie Kirk stuff a little bit in respects to Candace Owens. Obviously, they were friends to some degree, and now that he's been killed, yeah, she's obviously, I feel like she's trying to monetize on that in different ways. But what have you been focusing on with regards to Candace Owens? I know you mentioned that you've been doing a family tree. Can you talk a little bit about your work with the family tree and just about your thoughts on, you know, who she could really be and what she really believes and the work she does, or anything
Well,
that you can focus
I would say, and I meant to say it earlier, but it just came back to me. Your description, the use of the word fucky, I love that term. And that's what I would describe everything as. Either it is very fucky, and this also
on?
applies to Candace. One of my dear friends, Echo Cat, we, you know, kind of put our brains together on a lot of this stuff. And it's interesting because the only reason that I started looking into Candace at all or paying attention to any of this at all is because Echo Cat was like, hey, you need to look at this guy, John Mappin, that's pushing Candace. And so I go and look. Well, John Mappin, he is what Scientology calls a whale. This is
And
their
who is
term
John
for.
Mappin? Sorry to interrupt, but I noticed you did a post on that. And who is this John Mappin? I don't
So
recall.
So he is a whale in Scientology. This is what they call one of their big donors, basically like one of their pay pigs. Okay, so this is someone who's very wealthy. Now, John Mappin, he is a Scientologist. He claims that he's a Christian Scientologist, even though that doesn't make sense if anybody understands theology. Um, but he is the individual who introduced Candace Owens to her husband, George Farmer.
Ah,
He was also a very good friend, a close friend of Charlie Kirk. The there's a couple reasons why this is weird. So Candace did this show where, and I don't remember when it was because somebody had sent me the clip and I just downloaded it. She talks about Charlie, she thinks Charlie had a handler and she had a handler, and she explains how the person that she suspects was sent in to handle her was Process Rick Rubin, and that didn't work. It's very interesting, right? Because then who do they send in after that? They send in Corporate Process, which is Scientology, John Mappin. And John Mappin introduces her to her husband, George Farmer. Now, when you go online, there are some people out there, some of what I like to call, and I'm sure you're familiar with them, the shit code accounts, where, they have a ton of followers that they're monetized, and they're basically just making up stories with these threads, right? But people are pushing it as truths. There are a lot of people out there who say that, you know, John Mappin was pushing Candace and then slipping in the Scientology stuff. This is wildly inaccurate. If you look through the history of his posts, he's always pushed the Scientology stuff, and he's always pushed it with Candace, tagging, talking about Dianetics. And in particular, there is a big cutout of theirs, and it's called the Citizens Commission for Human Rights, or CCHR. This is one of Scientology's numerous cutouts. This is something that he pushes a lot, though. This is something that he recruits for out of his castle, King Arthur's castle, Camelot. He owns that. It is a hotel now. But it has been documented. There are numerous people that have talked about it over the years that have gone there to get auditing, things of that sort. He operates that as a recruiting front at times. But him and his wife, Irina Mappin, they own Camelot Castle. There's obviously a lot of weird stuff there in regards to there's a lot of weird veneration and worship with King Arthur, this Excalibur idea, especially with Hubbard. And there's King Arthur's Round Table of the Zodiac. Like, you can really go down some dark rabbit holes here. So
yeah.
there is a lot of cross pollination. But the story, as everyone knows, her and Farmer only knew each other for, basically 2.5 weeks, and then they get engaged. And the reason why this is interesting to me is because she paints it as immediate love. She sees him, she says that Charlie called the lone donors and the closest friends of Charlie Kirk, John Mappin. That John Mappin introduces her to George Farmer, and she's like, I need to go with him. I knew as soon as we laid eyes on each other that I was in love with him. Well, George has told it a different way. George has told it a very different way, that it was not romantic at all whatsoever. And then one day he just decided that he was going to propose to her. So I think that I think it was arranged. This is my opinion. I'm allowed to have it. Um, I think that this was an arranged situation, and I do think that John Mappin is her handler because, I don't watch Candace Owens, and I'm not trying to sound cool or anything. I don't. This was the reason why I started looking into it was because of the
Neither do
Scientology
I.
angle.
Yeah.
I thought it was weird. And I agree that there's a lot of people trying to grift off of it, and people could accuse me of that. And I would say, oh, okay, it's fair, I guess it's just the
Go fuck
timing of
yourself.
everything. I'm not trying to, though. I'm just interested in the Scientology stuff.
Yeah.
So when you look at it that way, she's blamed. I mean, what? We got maroon shirts, we got the French version of the CIA or something, we got Mormon beekeepers, like this girl, Egyptian airplanes, like she's gone all over the damn place. She's blamed everybody, but you know what she hasn't talked about? She has not mentioned Scientologists. And I wonder why, because there are Scientologists that were on the board of Turning Point USA. And I think that the reason why she doesn't talk about this is because of John Mappin and her relationship with him, because John Mappin is one of the biggest pushers of Candace Owens. He is constantly out there pushing her and saying that World War III is inevitable if we don't get to the truth of what happened to Charlie Kirk. I mean, this guy just is out here saying wild stuff. Now, in regards to something, a more recent development, I would say, is that an individual many people know by the name of George Webb, he's also sort of come into the picture where he's also providing an assist to Candace Owens. Well, George Webb told people yesterday that the Webb part of his name, it comes from Webb Mappin, which is the same Mappin that John Mappin is from. So George Webb and John Mappin are distant cousins, which is weird. It just speaks
Hmm.
to the spooky behavior of everything that's going on with this entire sort of ecosystem that's surrounding Charlie Kirk and whatever the hell is happening. But all that aside, when I started looking into Candace, because I was like, well, I've never really looked into her. I've never really been interested, right? Like I thought she did a good job with her Black Lives Matter documentary. I did find it really weird that she omitted the Yoruba part of the founders because the founders were members of the Yoruba cult. I thought that was a weird sin of omission.
Oh
But I
wow.
went ahead and decided to go and look, and I was like, she's changed her story a lot. We don't have her parents' names. And this was my big tell, because this is how I cut my teeth, like I said, with the process, was the name game. I know the name game when I'm seeing it because I've had to do family histories on all of the founding processians, and this is how I've gotten to where I have with being able to factually identify and trace all these different people. And so when I started seeing the name game with Candace, particularly with her father and her grandfather, I said, okay, I've got to sit down and kind of figure this out. So the way that she tells it is that she grew up in the hood of Stamford, Connecticut. That's not a thing. But that, she grew up in this hood and primarily raised by her mother and her grandparents, and her dad wasn't in her life. Her parents divorced when she was very young. The ages vary from 9 to 12. Most people know about uh, I would say, not a hate crime, but a racially motivated gang stalking or harassment campaign against her when she was nearing the end of high school, that the NAACP got involved with. That, well, her father, when you look at the court records, is actually her father that filed it on her behalf. So that immediately throws this story of dad not being in the picture kind of out the window, right? And so that was my first tell, because I said, well, did they lie on these court records? And it was her grandfather, because they have the same name. Grandpa and dad have the same name. And so I'm like, did grandpa lie or did dad lie? And I'm like, you know what? Let's just operate under the assumption that this is her father. And it was her father. There are photos out there of her standing right next to her father with the NAACP. When you start digging, and you really have to dig, because Robert Lee Owens is a very common name, and unfortunately, it's a very common name for bad guys with pretty nasty criminal histories. I don't really know why.
Oh wow.
Um, she did live, I don't know if it's with the grandparents. I don't know, how all of that worked, and I'm not out here trying to air dirty laundry, I'm just trying to correct the record, but she did grow up in Stanford, her family was there. Um, Her parents did not get divorced until she was almost 30, so I don't really know what to tell people. I don't really know why you would lie about something like that, that's kind of weird. I have all of these censuses, in Connecticut and Stanford, where you still see her parents. They're both in Stanford being registered for like the voter registration when she's in high school. So none of this really makes sense to me. And once this lawsuit goes through, they get close to $38,000. They win it from the Board of Education. And she goes on to create what a lot of people know as social autopsy. A lot of people say it was like her being a shit lib, doxing website, whatever. Um, she goes to the University of Rhode Island. She claims to take her mother's maiden name to avoid these harassers that were involved in the initial lawsuit. And then, she comes into the sort of political scene, so to speak. Uh, some of that's true, some of that's not. And it's really hard to not get lost in the weeds here. And it's very hard for me to explain this in a watered down way, because it took me about 36 hours to actually find all of this information, because I felt like I was losing my mind looking at so many Robert Lee Owens. Um, the reality is that yes, the story.
Oh.
Here.
Oh,
Oh, I think I
you're
just did it cut out?
yeah, you're
Was that
okay.
me?
Yeah, I think you're coming back now. There you go. You're back now.
Whoop.
I lost you
Oh,
for like
sorry guys. I don't know what happened. Both of us went
lost you
out.
for like 6 or 7 seconds, I
Sorry.
think. No, don't be,
Sorry about
please.
that. So
No,
the
don't be.
story about her grandfather, I'm sorry, I'm not going to say race because that's not accurate. Ethnicity. I think this is her pulling an ethnicity card. Her grandfather did grow up on a sharecropping farm, and he did eventually buy that sharecropping farm. The guy seemed to be, make a good life for himself and make a good life for his family. And, her grandfather seems like a stand-up dude, and he was very supportive of his family. When he went to Stanford in the 50s, and that's when he ends up marrying Candace's grandmother. Um, when the parents get together, her parents, that's still kind of blurry because we don't have family history on the mom's side, like, at all.
Okay.
But her father, once I had figured out who her father was and that I knew that I had the right guy, her father was, according to his own resume, out of his own words, but I will kind of censor how I phrase this. Her father was in charge of the security contracts for the uh, shooting incident in Newtown, Connecticut that did not happen, according to some people. Some people it did, with an individual by the name of Adam Lanza. This is a weird thing, that her father was in charge of the security contracts, in his own words, during tragic loss of life in Newtown, Connecticut at that event. Why is this weird? Because that is one of the things within that research community this entire time since that happened that they have wanted proof of, because they've never seen proof of it. So why would Candace Owens' dad be involved in that? Regardless of what happened that day, her dad knows more than anybody else on the planet, I would argue, besides the people that were there that day. Her dad knows more than anybody else, because that has been such sticking point is, where's the contracts for the biohazard cleanup? X, Y, and Z, security, this and that. He says that he was in charge of overseeing all the contracts during tragic loss of life. This is very weird. Now, some people think that I'm making it a stretch when I bring up this other point, and I'm like, well, you know what? I don't really care because, Alex Jones had that big lawsuit where he had to pay the families, $1 billion or something really stupid that's absolutely not going to happen, in regards to saying that nobody passed away at that event. The NAACP lawsuit, that lawyer, Norman Pattis, is the exact same lawyer that represented Alex Jones in his defamation lawsuit from the parents of those children at that school. So, in my personal opinion, I think that Candace, her father, and Alex Jones, I think that Alex Jones knows that Candace's father was involved in the was in charge of the security contracts for the event in Newtown. And I think that this speaks to the inorganic, spooky nature of her uprise because, for people that have been watching all of this stuff about Candace, I've been making the argument for a while now that the only natural place for her to go is to go full hoaxer. That it's a full hoax, that Charlie's not dead.
Okay.
Not because she believed that, but
No.
as a way to censor people, because that's what Alex Jones did, in my opinion. It was a way to silence dissent. You're not allowed to ask questions about certain things thanks to people like Alex Jones. And I think that that is what Candace was on her way to doing as well. And interestingly, then we have this, quick meeting with Erika where Erika and
Yes.
her decide to come together, and whatever they talked about, who knows?
I'm surprised they didn't do like a pay-per-view or something for that to grift as much as they could from that. But I'm sure, yeah, a lot of interesting things are said. And yeah, sorry to interrupt. Keep going.
No, I agree completely. I was waiting for a cat fight. I'm like, pull out Erica's weave. Let's go. Like, I wanted it to be like some hood rat shit, And
Sure.
and P. Thomas is right because, he was there when it happened, so her dad's resume, because I found the resume on the internet right after I premiered that stream, they erased like the search cache of her father's resume from the internet. They wiped it immediately. And I've been told, I haven't watched it yet because I haven't had time, but I've been told that yesterday her return show that she made some weird commentary about her family. She was very vague. I don't know. I've seen people spend a lot of money in super chats. I mean, like a lot of money, where people are asking about things that I have brought up. Some of my
Oh,
subscribers that, like, I recognize their names, that they're going into other big channels to ask her. So I don't know if these things are getting on her radar. And quite frankly, I don't really care. I just thought that it was weird that there wasn't information out there. But once I started peeling it all apart, it was like, I think that this is why. Because it shows that her whole shtick with trying to say that she's very relatable to the everyday, blue collar Joe Schmo. And, she wants to sit there and point at Turning Point USA like they're the elitist. And it's like, no, you're part of the elitist. You are part of it, whether you're willing to admit it or not. And I think that she has protection within the role that she serves as a propagandist on YouTube. I think that part of that comes from her marriage to George Farmer, because he is the Honorable George Farmer, son of Lord Farmer. Okay, so she's married into that. She's protected that way. The French are not going to put out a hit on somebody in that role. I'm sorry, that's just not reality. And then we also have that over there within that line, she is protected by the Vatican because they're Catholic. They have a different relationship with the church over there in those circles of the peerage, so to speak. So I think that she's taken everybody for a really long ride. And it's unfortunate. I think it's been a masterclass in watching a active psyop, and I hate using that term because it's overused. I think it kind of loses its power, but I think it's been interesting to watch a psyop in real time and how the ebbs and flows of all of that. Uh, I don't know, guys. Is she going to completely walk it back? I mean, that's my question. She's been taking people on a ride for months. What's the other choice? She has to completely shit on Erika. I don't know if she's going to do that.
Well, we will. I mean, I saw a couple um, articles. I haven't seen any clips from the Tuesday show. I don't think. I think some of them are saying essentially that here, I'll pull this up. That she's not going to step back or backpedal, but some were saying that like her chat was blowing up on the show, saying that she was bending the knee to Erika Kirk. So
Correct.
yeah, I don't know.
I saw the
You
threat.
you heard that? Okay. Do you know
Look, man.
What their contention was, or
So I hate to be petty because again, it's like I see her as just like this total con artist grifter, and you know, it's a lot of her people have been very nasty, which hey, it's the nature of the internet. But some of them have warmed up to me and have watched my older stuff, and they're like, "Oh, you've been saying fake and gay before she even started a podcast," and it's like, yeah, well, I didn't want to be petty. A lot of the sticking points on this stuff that I have seen, I've read some of these super chats. They feel that she is leaning into whatever Erika allegedly knows or doesn't know.
okay,
I think that people were upset that she was vague, but what do you guys expect? She's always vague, right? She
yeah,
has to give
exactly.
herself enough plausible deniability. So I don't really know. Like, did you think that Erika was going to come out and say it definitely wasn't the Mormon beekeepers? Like, no, that's stupid. I don't really know what people expect, but I think that unless she blatantly shits on Erika, because people love to say, well, Candace didn't say that. You didn't watch the show. And it's like, guys, she
Yeah,
says things without saying it all the time in every fucking episode. There is such a thing as context and implication of what you were saying, and insinuation. And she has insinuated that everybody around Charlie was involved. Do I think that there's a conversation to be had? Yeah, absolutely. There's a conversation to be had. But in that insinuation, a lot of her fans who are a bit more rabid, they just straight up blame Erika. They said that it was Erika that took him out. You know what I mean? So it's people are going to have these very visceral reactions. But again, I do think that part of it is she's either going to have to walk it all back or she's going to have to completely shit on Erika Kirk. And I don't know which way that's going to go. I don't know how long that's going to last because there's a really good argument that this Macron lawsuit,
yeah,
this is something that she's distracting from because she is at risk of losing a lot of money.
it's possible. It's possible. What are your thoughts? Now that we'll wrap it up, what are your thoughts on the Macron theory?
Oh, I think Macron has a dick. Like, I mean, let's all be real. Looks like a dude, right? Dude looks like a lady. But I mean, and I think that there's a conversation to be had where, regardless of if the Macrons, if they think that they're going to come out sterling, even if they win, they're not because of the age disparity. It's like you groomed your student. That's still going to be in the public record. That's still a valid criticism. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Like you're a government official, people are allowed to criticize that and that's
absolutely.
gross. And you don't get to tell people that they're not allowed to have feelings about it. It is what it is. However, it's whether it was the Macron thing or again Alex Jones with the school in Connecticut, that type of deal. I don't think that Candace can afford the Macron thing and going full hoaxer with the Charlie Kirk stuff, right? And I think that it's odd that there's already misinformation going on right now that Mikey McCoy was silently removed from Turning Point during this meeting between these two women because Mikey McCoy, who's Rob McCoy's son, Mikey McCoy basically stepped away from Turning Point like days after Charlie was murdered. Mikey's in his like early to mid 20s, and that's like one of the main people that Candace has blamed for what happened to Charlie, called his behavior suspicious. And it's like, look, I'm not saying that some of these people aren't questionable, but your frontal lobe isn't fully developed until 25 to 30. This kid was 18 when he started working for Charlie. Charlie's basically been a part of his life the entire time. And it's always tragic, regardless of what happened. Loss of life is always tragic. If Charlie's dead, I'm still not sold on that either. However, he was not silently removed from Turning Point stuff. He immediately came out and was like, no, I'm stepping away. But you know who was silently removed that nobody is talking about? And Candace hasn't gone to the next level with the topic, which I think also speaks to something spookier going on with her. And I've highlighted this previously in other streams. Rob McCoy was removed, Mikey's father. Rob McCoy was the person that got Charlie Kirk on the 7 Mountain Mandate thing. Rob McCoy was taken off of Turning Point Faith's website while those two women had their meeting. So I don't know why people are out here spreading misinformation or lying that Mikey was removed, but Rob was. And that is a very serious question that people should ask, because Candace has painted Rob and his church, Calvary Chapel, as this sort of unique phenomena that tainted Charlie in regards to this Christian nationalism thing. It's not unique to that church at all. This is a very specific belief system, and she hasn't taken it to that next level of talking about it. And I think that that's what these people have to do as propagandists. They have to be able to go so far and then stop, because they're not allowed to take it all the way. Because when you start taking these things all the way, it's not favorable for their bottom line. You know what I'm saying? These are just questions that I think that people should ask her. You know, if you're not going to sit there and harangue her about, the Erika thing, let's talk about why Rob McCoy was removed from Turning Point Faith. Because the Christian nationalism thing is a problem. And I say that as someone who I am a Christian, but I don't identify with a lot of what people would call Christian today, especially, in like the United States. And I'm not here to have like a theological debate with people, but people should be asking her to talk about that, because that was something very secretive that was done while those two women were having that meeting. And Rob McCoy is credited with getting Charlie this whole thing with Trump, getting Trump elected this last time. That was Rob McCoy and Charlie. It was those two men. That's what a lot of people credit it with, including Megyn Kelly.
Rotting Jewels, ladies and gentlemen. Dana, can you tell everyone where they can find you, please?
Yes, Rotting Jewels on YouTube and Instagram. Dana Duda on Twitter or X, and What is the Process podcast, wherever you listen. I have my final, hopefully, I'm saying final, my final Candace Turning Point video coming out in 2.5 hours. That'll be premiering on my YouTube if you would like to watch, but that is part 4 of 4. Because I'm walking away from this and getting back to more important things like my process research. So
good for you. Well, everyone check that out. Thank you so much for your time, Dana. Don't go anywhere. Real quick, thanks to everyone in the chat. Thanks to all the viewers and listeners. Appreciate you guys so much. Thanks for all the new watchers and listeners in the chat. Thanks for all the new subscribers from today and over the last couple weeks. I notice you guys. I notice every single one of you guys. So I really do appreciate that. Please subscribe to the Divulgence Podcast on YouTube. We're back on Rumble. You can check us there, as well as Spotify and wherever you get your podcasts. Please subscribe, leave a nice comment, review, something like that. Much appreciated. But yeah, thanks again, Dana. Thanks to everyone, and happy holidays, everyone, and stay safe.